Okay, hi all. So we are going to continue with chapter 3. So gains from the trade. So we did the production possibility frontier last time. If the country produces itself and do not use trade, it needs to do the consumption on the production possibility frontier, one of the possible production levels. Okay. But if the countries can trade, we are gonna see how it benefits. Okay. So in this chapter, we are gonna look at why do people and nations choose to be economically interdependent. So they need each other, right? So you buy something produced in India or produced in China, everywhere. China productions are everywhere. So how can trade make everyone better off? And what's the absolute advantage? What's comparative advantage? How are these concepts are similar? How are they different? We are going to look at those in this chapter. Okay, so every day you rely on many people from around the world, most of whom you have never met, to provide you with the goods and services you enjoy. Okay, for instance, cell phone from Taiwan, coffee from Kenya, dress shirt from China, hair gel from Cleveland, Ohio, etc. So whatever you wear on yourself, actually Turkey is good at in clothes production. So you may have Turkish clothes produced in Turkey, but it may be cheaper to produce in somewhere else, and it can come from there. Okay. So interdependence, one of the 10 principles of chapter 1 is trade can make everyone better off. How we are going to learn why people and nations choose to be interdependent and how they can gain from the trade. Okay. Consider two countries, US and Japan, and they produce two goods. So we are modeling, so we are simplifying things. Okay. So they are producing computers and wheat. So we chose these products so that they do not affect each other. Okay, we are not looking at computers and cell phones, etc. Okay, one is from agriculture, one is from the technical production. Okay, they use one resource, let's say labor, and measured in hours. Okay, labor resources measured in hours, and we will look at how much of both goods each country produces and consumes. If the country chooses to be self-sufficient means that if it chooses to consume what it produces only. Okay, and if it trades with the other country. Okay. So production possibilities in the US, and suppose US has 50,000 hours of labor available for production per month. Okay, so these are given numbers, you know those, okay? And producing one computer requires 100 hours of labor, and producing 1 ton of wheat requires 10 hours of labor. So draw the production possibility frontier by yourself now, okay? So in total, US has 50,000 labor hours, and then 50,000 labor hours. It can either produce computer or wheat. Let's draw the corners first, okay? And let's suppose that production possibility frontier is linear. Okay, how are you gonna draw that? You're gonna divide, okay, 50,000 hours to 100 hours to find how many at most US can produce computer. Okay, so 50,000 divided by 100, it can produce 500 computers at most. Okay, so you are gonna have two names in your axis. Okay, so one is computer, one is wheat. Okay, so this is how it is. Okay, and then by dividing 50,000 to 100, you're going to have 500 computers, okay, in one corner. And by dividing 50,000 to 10, you're going to have 5,000 tons of wheat in another corner. Okay, so you're gonna have something like this. Okay, so this is production possibility frontier for US. Okay, now let's look at, okay, so we are gonna do this. We did already. Okay, so you have this as a production possibility frontier. Anything inside this triangle can be produced. Okay, but for being efficient, production efficient, what will US do? It's gonna produce somewhere on the frontier, this blue line. Okay. Without trade, suppose US uses half of its labor to produce each of the goods. Okay, so it's gonna produce, let's suppose, okay, so this, we don't know for sure, it is the assumption. Okay, so it depends on actually people's preferences where where the consumption will be. We will look at in the later chapters for that. Okay, for now let's assume that so country prefers to use its resources half by half. Okay, it's going to produce 250 computers and 2,500 tons of wheat. Okay, now let's look at the Japan's production possibility frontier. So for Japan, there are 30,000 hours of labor available for production per month. Okay, producing one computer requires 125 hours of labor, and producing 1 ton of wheat requires 25 hours of labor. Okay, what are you gonna do? Again, you are gonna have two-dimensional graph. Okay, in one dimension you are gonna have computer, in other dimension you are gonna have wheat. Okay, if the country spends all of its resources, which is 30,000 hours of labor on producing computer, how many computers it can produce? Okay, 30,000 divided by 125. If the country spends all of its resources on producing wheat, how many tons of wheat it can produce? 30,000 divided by 25. Okay, so this is the Japan's production possibility frontier. Okay, so if it uses all of its resources to produce computer, it can produce 240 units of computers. If it uses all of its resources to produce wheat, it can produce 1,200 tons of wheat. Okay, again, let's assume that the country uses half of its labor to produce each good. So as a consumption point, okay, as a consumption point, it chooses this red dot. Okay, now we're going to compare consumption with and without trade. Okay, so without trade means the country needs to consume somewhere inside the production possibility set. Okay, with trade it doesn't need to be so. We are going to show it. Okay, without trade, US consumers get 250 units of computers and 2,500 tons of wheat. And Japanese consumers get 120 computers and 600 tons of wheat. Okay, we will compare consumption without trade to consumption with trade. Okay, first we need to see how much of each good is produced and traded by two countries. Okay. Suppose these are all assumptions. So I'm going to show you how we arrive this situation. Okay, so these are the numbers just to show you each country is better off by trading. Okay, now suppose US produces 3,400 tons of wheat. So if it were to consume by itself, what was the number? 2,500 tons of wheat. Okay, how many computers would US be able to produce with its remaining labor? Okay, so for wheat, it needs 10 hours. For one ton of wheat, it needs 10 hours of labor, right? So you're gonna multiply this 3,400 tons of wheat with 10. Okay, so it's gonna use 34,000 hours of labor to produce to produce this many wheat. Okay, so in total, US has 50,000 labor hours, right? So you are gonna subtract from this 34,000 hours from 50,000 hours. So remaining will be the number of hours that should be spent on producing computers. Okay, 16,000. Okay, 16,000 hours of labor remained. And then in order to produce a computer, how many hours is needed? 100 hours. Okay, you're going to divide this with 100. This US can produce 160 computers. Okay, and similarly, suppose Japan produces 240 computers. How many tons of wheat would Japan be able to produce with its remaining labor? Okay, so this is what we found for US, and this is with 240 computers requires all of it is Japan labor hours. Okay, so Japan is gonna produce 0 units of wheat. Okay, and then we will be here. Okay, so it's not good, right? For Japan, if it is self-sufficient, it's not good. But let's see what will happen. Okay, so exports means what? So these countries will trade, right? So for the terms that we are using for countries trades is export and import. Export means goods produced domestically and sold abroad. Okay, and to export means to sell domestically produced the goods. Export imports in goods produced abroad and sold domestically. Okay, the import is what you get from the outside. The export is what you send to outside. Okay, and then remember, US was producing 3,400 tons of wheat. If it sends 700 tons of wheat to Japan, and as a return, if it obtains 110 computers from Japan, then what will happen to consumption levels in the US and Japan? Are they better off now compared to the self-sufficient case? Remember, in the self-sufficient case, they were using half of their labor hours for each good. Okay, and in the US, they were consuming this much. Okay, let me see. So this is the production possibility frontier for the US. Okay, so initially they produce 3,400 tons of wheat and 160 units of computer. Okay, and they import computers from Japan. Okay, 110 units of computer, and they export 700 tons of wheat. Okay, and then at the end they will have, you're gonna sum the computers, 270 units of computers, and you're gonna subtract the wheat, 2,700 wheat. Okay, which is outside of the production possibility frontier. Okay, so initially, what was this country was consuming? We were saying that half of the resources are used for production computer, half of the resources are used for production of wheat, 250 and 2,500 units of wheat. Now it's better, right? Without trade, it's not possible to attain this blue point. Okay, with trade now it can achieve. Similarly for Japan. Okay, Japan was produced 214 of computers, and they imported 700 tons of wheat from US, and they export 110 units of computers. So in total, they have 130 units of computers and 700 tons of wheat. Okay. Again, this is outside of their production possible to frontier. Okay. Okay. So it's passing fast. Sorry. Ay niye böyle oluyor? Evet. Okay. Okay. So initially what was Japan is consuming? Japan is consuming, again, they were using half of their resources for computer production and half of its production for the wheat. And at the end, they will have 120 computers and 600 tons of wheat. Okay, again, they are better off. Okay, now, so actually, it's going to show, these tables are going to show how they are better, or how these countries are better off. Okay, so computers without trade in the US, they were consuming 250 units of computers. With trade, it increased 270. So there's a benefit for the wheat. There are 200 tons of benefit from the wheat. Okay. Similarly for Japan, okay? Both countries better off after the trade, okay? Now, we're gonna explain how countries will decide which one will produce which good, okay? This is an important question, okay? Where do these gains come from? So there's something called as absolute advantage and comparative advantage, okay? Absolute advantage is the ability to produce a good using fewer inputs than another producer. So US has an absolute advantage in wheat, right? So actually, US has absolute advantage in both of the goods. Why? If we look at the labor hours needed to produce 1 ton of wheat, okay, in the US, 10 hours of labor hours is needed to produce 1 ton of wheat. And in Japan, 25 hours of labor hours is needed to produce 1 ton of wheat. So which one is lower? In the US. Okay, producing wheat is cheaper. Producing wheat is cheaper in the US. Okay, similarly for the computer, how many labor hours is needed? So we're cheaper is wrong, maybe, because we don't know the wage that's given to the workers. The resources, in terms of resources, okay? Let's talk in terms of resources. How many labor hours is needed to produce one computer in the US? 100 hours of units of, and 100 hours is needed to produce one computer. How many hours is needed to produce one computer in Japan? 125. Again, lower resources, which is the labor hours, is needed to produce computer in the US. So US has absolute advantage in both goods, but still it's not producing both of them, okay? So it's better in producing in both of the goods, but it's not producing both of them, okay? If each country has an absolute advantage in one good and specializes in that good, then both countries can gain from trade. So in this example, we have the same country has absolute advantage on both goods. But it can be the situation that each country can have absolute advantage in one of the goods. Then it means that each country has also comparative advantage. I'm going to come to that, what's comparative advantage. But this sentence is saying you that if this is the case, then specializing in that good and having a trade will benefit to both countries. Okay, it may explain what's comparative advantage. Which country has an absolute advantage in producing computers? We told already, US. Okay, producing one computer requires 125 labor hours in Japan, but only 100 hours in the US. US has an absolute advantage in both goods. Okay, so why does Japan specialize in computers, and why do both countries gain from trade? Okay, why don't US producing both of them? We are gonna answer that because there are two measures of cost of a good. Two countries can gain from trade when each country is specialized in the good. It produces at the lowest cost. Okay. While talking about the lowest cost, we are considering the opportunity cost of producing that good. Okay. Absolute advantage measures the cost of a good in terms of inputs required to produce it. Okay. Another measure of the cost is opportunity cost. For the comparative advantage, we are going to talk from the opportunity costs. In our example, the opportunity cost of a computer is the amount of wheat that could be produced using labor needed to produce one computer. Okay. Or you can look at the slope of the production possibility frontier we draw, right? So what is the slope of the production possibility frontier? In order to produce 1 unit of computer, how many tons of wheat a country should leave, right? So opportunity cost is the slope. Okay. Comparative advantage is the ability to produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than another producer. Okay, so which country has the comparative advantage in computers? You need to look at the opportunity cost of the computer. Okay, the opportunity cost of computer is, as I said, you are going to look at the slope. Okay, so you are going to look at the slope. In order to produce 1 unit of computer, how many wheats it should drop? Okay, 10 tons of wheat it should drop in the US. Okay, but it is 5 in Japan. Okay, so opportunity cost of computer is lower in Japan. So Japan has a comparative advantage in producing computer. Okay, so Japan has a comparative advantage in computers. So what is the lesson? Absolute advantage is not necessary for comparative advantage. Okay, so we know that US has absolute advantage in producing both goods. Nevertheless, Japan has a comparative advantage in producing computers. Then while deciding which country produces which good, we are looking at the comparative advantage, right? Remember the example that we solved, Japan was producing only computers. Okay, comparative advantage and trade. Gains from trade arise from comparative advantage, so difference in the opportunity cost. When each country specializes in the goods in which it has comparative advantage, total production in all countries is higher, and the world's economic pie is bigger, and all countries gain from trade. Okay, this is the reason why we have interdependence between countries. Okay, the same applies to individual producers like farmer and rancher specializing in different goods and trading with each other. This is what I was telling you, right? So during the pandemic, we are trying to be self-sufficient, but in general, the hairdresser is different, baker is different, right? Everyone specialized on something. This is the same thing. Okay, if you are better on a task, you should do that task. Okay, in terms of efficiency, as in here. Okay, so we are going to solve this example in the class. Okay, try to solve by yourself. Okay, first you should draw the production possibility sets and find that who has absolute advantage and comparative advantage, and if there's a trade, who would sell what. Okay, thank you. Let's see you during the class. Okay.